Welcome to Speaking in the Disciplines. This is an event that brings together the speakers and participants that have been part of the Speaking in the Disciplines workshop that is well known to all faculty. I'd like to thank Lynn Clark for bringing us here together. Lynn is in the Department of Communication and has been running the Speaking in the Disciplines workshop since 2015. So Lynn, we asked you to bring a few of your folks that have either been participating currently or from past years to share their experiences and what we can learn from participating and speaking in the disciplines. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Adriana, and good morning and welcome to everybody to this third panel event in the Dietrich School Workshop series. Just briefly, I will say that the faculty seminar, Speaking in the Disciplines, is all geared towards helping Dietrich School faculty incorporate student speaking and listening in their courses. And it's all towards facilitating students' achievement of course learning objectives. So you'll hear today about at least three ways in which some of our faculty have incorporated student speaking and listening in their courses, all to productive and positive effect. So during this hour, we're going to hear from three colleagues, and I am going to introduce each of them. I'm going to introduce one person, then we'll hear from that person. We'll introduce the second panelist, we'll hear from them, and the same with the third panelist. And then I'll open the floor to oral Q&A. If you want to put a question in the chat, you're more than welcome to. I'll moderate that, but we'll try to leave the questions for the end so that you get the full benefit of hearing what's possible or some of what's possible from speaking in the disciplines, and then we can move on and have a rich discussion. So our first presenter today, I'm just going in alphabetical order by last name, is Jay Arms, and he is a teaching associate professor of ethnomusicology in the music department. And in that department, he serves as track advisor for the global and popular music track. And he's also the co-director of the University Gamelan Ensemble. And thanks, Jay, for helping me pronounce that correctly. His undergraduate courses introduce students to ethnographic research methods for music, and they coordinate community-based ethnographic projects in which oral communication is pivotal. So I'll turn over the reins to Jay.
Thanks so much, Lynn, and thanks everyone for coming today on this holiday weekend. It's really exciting to kind of talk through my materials again. One of the things I appreciate most about these Dietrich School seminars is just the ability to sit down with other faculty, see what other people are doing, things that they're trying out, things that work, things that don't work, and to kind of workshop your things before going live in a real class situation. So I'm here having just taken the Speaking in the Discipline seminar in the fall, and I've just implemented some of the initial, what do you call it, the assignments and transformations I did to my syllabus just this term, and have some data to share, which is very exciting and fun. So I'll start just by talking about the class that I workshop. The way that I approached the seminar was to focus on one class that I teach, in which oral communication has a really important role, but often one that I found when I started teaching the class that maybe I overlooked a little bit. And this is a course called Music 1310, Introduction to Global and Popular Music. It's one of the most important courses in the music department. It's required of all music majors and minors. And I call it the cornerstone of the global and popular music track, which is what we call our undergraduate program in ethnomusicology. So this is the one opportunity where all students get exposed to ethnographic research methods. And the sort of backbone of the course, as Lynn mentioned, are these community-based ethnographic projects where I put students in groups and I send them out into various parts of Pittsburgh where they engage with perhaps a musical ensemble, perhaps a cultural institution or a place of worship, sometimes an individual, sometimes a kind of school of music. And they practice the ethnographic methods we learn over the semester. They do participant observation, ethnographic interviews, musical transcriptions if relevant, and they create a project somehow in dialogue with some scholarly sources and library research that they do. throughout that project, in various capacities, in unexpected ways, students have to communicate well with each other in their small groups. They have to learn to negotiate the social conflicts that emerge inevitably in this kind of group project. They have to learn to communicate with their interlocutors at their field site. When you go to, say, the Sankofa village, where they're teaching African drumming and dancing to kids in Homewood, they have to explain, what am I doing? What are we doing at the school? What do we want to learn? What can the school provide for us? What can we provide to the school? Without just throwing out jargon terms like, oh, we want to do participant observation, and things like that. They have to learn to communicate what they need in an effective way. And then they have to learn to translate the kind of ethnographic data that they receive into a kind of scholarly presentational format by the end of the semester, where they share what their findings, they put it in dialogue with the library research that they did, and with the theoretical concepts and methods that we study throughout the semester. So throughout this process, students have to do these things, but I realized very quickly after starting to teach the class that a lot of students don't necessarily have those soft skills that the task sort of implies. So the first thing I did in the Speaking in the Discipline seminar was really try to think about that initial encounter of making contact, of how the students get in touch with these groups. When I started teaching this class and started actually shadowing the class before I was even teaching it, I was helping another colleague during the pandemic. I did a lot of the sort of front-loaded work of establishing the field sites, getting an interlocutor ready to go, explaining what the students would do. So by the time the students started, they already had a phone number to call, somebody who knew what they were doing, and they had a very soft landing. But I really wanted to incorporate the process of choosing a field site, something that they would want to do rather than something I assigned them, as well as the process of explaining what you're doing to somebody or to somebody else, and kind of establishing that relationship for themselves rather than top-down instructor first. But then I found I overcorrected a little bit, and I was just telling students, okay, find a field site, make contact, I can help you, these are some things you can do. But what I found my students were doing in this digital age is they would go on to perhaps the Cultural Center's website, they would scroll down to the contact form, they would fill it out, submit, and then they would wait, often for days or weeks at a time. And sometimes progress just didn't happen. And then all of a sudden we had a problem, and sometimes we had to switch field sites. So I wanted to create an assignment that really forced them to think about the making contact, think about how they would introduce themselves, how they would represent what the university is doing to these members of the community who are maybe unaware of what we're up to. So I designed this assignment I call Making Contact, where we do a little bit of role play. And here I'll share my screen for you. And it's a very simple assignment at face value, but it encourages them to think about the way that they speak, the way that they phrase themselves, the way that they represent themselves, their group, and the university to a community partner. And the core of this assignment is to think ahead about who's the person you're going to reach out to, not the name of the institution or the organization, but the actual person you're going to be in contact with. Who are they? What do they do? What is their experience with perhaps working with the university or their role in the institution? And how will you introduce yourself to this person, knowing what you know about them? And then the students collaboratively will develop a script for the conversation, sort of a rough guide for when you make the phone call. What are you going to say? What do you hope to achieve? What can the community gain from this kind of partnership? And ask them to consider their speaking tone, cadence, and inflection to help communicate. And then before they even call the field sites, I'm having the students role play this conversation with each other. I'm asking them, one, to step out of the room and to actually talk on the phone and go through that process of only listening, only speaking, trying to establish a rapport with somebody. And then they do a critical reflection on what it felt like to make that phone call, what kind of unexpected turns happened in that role play conversation, and ask the students to, ask critical questions, but not derail the conversation too much. And then to just turn in a short reflection, and then within their group, choose the person that they want to make the real phone call and to execute their script. And it was really interesting doing this for the first time this semester, because students have different levels of comfort doing this sort of thing. A lot of them have never made a phone call like this before in the past. Some of them, English is their second language. So just the act of speaking in general can be a little bit intimidating. And the results were really a pleasure to read. I had one student write in the reflection, I'll just summarize just how much he underestimated the kind of thought process that he thought, okay, I know what to say. We have this script, but once he started talking, he forgot everything. He had to really like take a second and ground himself to communicate. And so it was really rewarding for the students, I think, to go through that process in a kind of safe environment before going live and talking to members of the community. I did a similar thing where previously I've always had students conduct a low stakes ethnographic interview or ask them to find a friend or a roommate or a sibling and write an interview, compose a set of interview questions for them and conduct that. I've changed it this time where I've had them interview each other in their groups to kind of support intra-group communication, where they're learning more about each other. It becomes a getting to know you exercise and another low stakes way to practice a method that they're expected to do at their field sites in a real world environment. And again, that one worked out really well. The students kind of learned how to do an interview, learned like, oh, I'm taking too many notes, I'm not really listening, and really getting some of those soft skills that kind of fade into the background when we read theoretically about a process like the ethnographic interview. So I think that's about the time that I have for today. I'm happy to elaborate more during the questions, but I don't want to take up everyone else's time.
Thank you so much, Jay, and thanks for really giving us a rich sense of how what students do in the classroom with oral communication can really impact what they're able to do outside the classroom when they're talking to strangers and the stakes are much higher. Our next presenter is Linda O'Reilly, and she is a teaching associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences. And in that department, she teaches foundations of biology, biochemistry, metabolic pathways and regulation, and communications in the biological sciences. Her scholarly interests center on innovative pedagogical approaches for fostering student engagement in large introductory lecture courses, right? And I'm excited to hear more about that today. And that's a focus that led her to pursue taking the Speaking in the Discipline seminar. In addition to her teaching responsibilities, Dr. O'Reilly is a standing member of the Provost's Committee on Open Educational Resources, and that reflects her commitment to accessible and equitable education. Linda, please take it over from here.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I am going to screen share a couple of slides just to talk about the structure of how I've organized my project, because it's like Jay, I'm going to talk about my project. I will just give an overview for people who haven't taken the seminars that typically when we meet, we are going to have the first half of the workshop tends to be guided discussion, guided by Lynn there in terms of on a particular topic. And then we have workshop time, and each of us is going to work on our particular project. And as Jay said, one of the big strengths here is that it is cross-discipline. So in my cohort, there was a lot of communications people, which was great. So that really challenges you to come out of your comfort zone of just the content and focusing more on the communication part of it. So I just want to talk about what I ended up with my project. Just get down to my button here. All right, so this was my goal when I came to the class was just to try and provide more opportunities to practice the language of science in that large enrollment classroom. And that idea being that really what I want to do is to build confidence in my students. This is I'm talking about the Foundation of Biology 1 class now. So this is their first experience on campus. They're in very large classes. We're up to 320 students now per class, per section. And so for the students to build that confidence, one of the things they have to be able to do is to speak confidently and use the very technical language of biology. And so the more opportunities they have to speak, hopefully I'm hoping they're going to gain more confidence and just feel more belonging and more part of that community in the classroom. So if I think about my traditional lecture, I've got my students over here, here's me talking, and they're processing and they're listening, but they don't really get an opportunity to speak a lot or to practice that technical language. And so what I wanted to do was have a project, and this is what I was workshopping in the Speaking in the Disciplines, where we could actually have some sort of opportunity where each student would get to present in the class and present to an audience and get feedback from that audience too. And so that brings me to one thing that really stuck with me from what Lynn hammered into us every week, which is we are learning to speak and speaking to learn. So in this workshop, I was learning how to teach how to speak to my students, but then when they're speaking, they are learning, right? So the more that they speak, the more confidence they have in using that special language, the more confidence they have, the more they're learning themselves too. And so the project I developed here was setting up some scaffolded or guided speaking points I wanted the students to then present. And so we used technology for this. This was happening just after COVID. And so students were very comfortable with Zoom. So I thought we could use Zoom and have people record their particular presentation. So everyone in the class got technical instructions just to remind them in terms of how to use Zoom, how to upload their recordings, and also some pointers in terms of the best practices for presenting and communicating, which I cribbed from what I learned in Lynn's seminar. And so I would give them something like this every week, depending on the topic. We had different topics. And so what I would do is give them, this is the image from the textbook. Here's the learning objectives. Here's background information. And this is the terminology I want you to use. This is the technical language I want you to use in this when you give your presentation. They were allowed to use one slide and just present that. And then they had to have their face showing so that we could have that good communication, right? That's another thing I learned in speaking of the disciplines. Being able to actually be seen is very important in terms of communicating well. Then the viewers were also going to be the students in the class, and I'll talk about the structure of how we organize this for 300 students. But the viewers are then given a very specific scoring requirements in terms of, was the content correct? Was all the content there? So they were also given in terms of their grading rubric for the presentation. Here are all the terminology that should have been used. And also there's a space to provide open comments for presenters. So this was the feedback that would be given back to the presenter. So in terms of how I structured this then, again, I workshopped this in the speaking disciplines. It was very helpful in terms of just processing how I was going to do this. So every week, what I would have is 2 topics, and each topic, there'll be 15 students working on that topic 1, 15 students working on topic 2. They're making their slide. They're going to present something 3 to 5 minutes long and make that recording. It was then each of those presentations were then randomly assigned to 20 students so that each presentation got reviewed by at least 20 students. The students reviewing them would only get 2 presentations, one topic 1 and one topic 2. So the burden wasn't too great in terms of it was a total of 10 minutes total as part of a homework assignment where they would actually review the recordings. They would then score the recordings. So then I didn't have to do any grading with this project, which was great. All my time and effort was in just the setup and the scaffolding. And so I would just tabulate then the scores and convert them over into points. And importantly, give that feedback from the comments from the reviewers back to the actual presenters. So they actually had all of that information. And, you know, I would say that overall, with the way this flowed, over the 10 weeks, 30 students presenting each week, that meant that it took 10 weeks to get all 300 students. So over the course of the semester, everyone got to present once. Every week, they got to review 2 recordings and they got to give feedback on that. Comments from the students where they really enjoyed reviewing the recordings. They really liked being able to see how other people were presenting it and how other people were processing the material differently from how I was presenting it in class or in the textbook, just seeing a fresh view of it. And they didn't like so much the actual presenting part of it, that they found a little bit stressful, which is understandable. So I really like this idea of trying to get students have more opportunities to present. But with this particular format, 2 caveats or 2 cons of the system were really that students only got to present once. And it took a long time in terms of they took a week to make their presentations, a week for students to view the presentations, and they got the comments back the week after. So it's not instantaneous in terms of getting feedback. And I wanted to have more of a conversational feel. So what I wanted to do then was to also make some more high quality recordings so that they could be sustainable and used in future semesters. So one thing I will say with the grading, it was great, but typically students who had fancier graphics got higher points. And what I really wanted the focus to be was more not so much the graphics and the fancy slide being made, but really that speaking and how well that was done, and whether or not the communication was efficient in terms of making sure that the science was correct and communicating that well to the audience. So what I did was, after running this project the first semester, is I took the students who had the highest scores and I applied for a Nancy Tannery OER award. This is how I got interested in open education resources. And what I want to do was get a little summer salary for me, but also some funding for the students to participate in this project. And I used the University Light Board, which is over in Classroom Services. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment if you haven't seen it. But the idea is you're just drawing things out. So we're removing the fancy graphics, and it really is just about communicating with words and some very simple diagrams to the audience. So this is my first iteration, and moving on from here, this is what I currently do in the classroom. So as I said, I had the students make these, the top scoring students, a little bit of funding for them to do this. They were able to make these Lightboard recordings. And what I would do then is build a homework assignment with these Lightboard recordings embedded each week, so one per each week. And what we also did is what I also did was to put in just a little introduction about the presenter, because it's a student, it's not me. That's also important, that communication, that it's not just me presenting, a student can do this too. How they actually built it. So give this scaffold for the now new audience watching this, how the presenter decided to take this information and process it. And this is what came out of it, how they presented that, how they communicated it. Also some practice of questions associated so that the students who are viewing it, are they processing it? Are they getting the information out? And then importantly, at the end, the student who's watched this peer presenter is then going to be assigned another topic, and they're going to present that in their recitation group. So instead of making a recording themselves, we're going to do it live and get live feedback on the same day. So this is just a still from the light board. So what you'll see is it's just like drawing on the board, except it's a clear glass between, and you stand behind it. And so you can use a pen. And you can see here our presenter has already drawn out some basic things, and then they're just presenting, but you can also draw as you're presenting. And so and then because you're facing the audience as opposed to just writing with your back to the audience can get a better feel for what you're presenting. They can see you. And really it's more synergistic as opposed to kind of fighting with a fancy graphic. It's just really synergistic between what the person is saying and what they're drawing at the same time. So these were made, and then I put these out as a homework assignment. The students then are going to look at this, process this, and then from that, seeing this modeled for them now, they should be able to take a new topic and be able to do the same thing in their recitation groups. So now we've moved that to recitation groups 4 or 5. They're going to present to the group, but also we have UTAs going around who, again, have the key in terms of what should be said. And I'll say with the student presenters here, they're given the same rubrics in terms of this is what you should be presenting. Here's the figure. Here's the words you should be using. And that's what we're going to say to your group. But they're able to get more instantaneous feedback now. It's more of a conversation that once it's presented, they can get questions straight away as opposed to waiting 3 weeks to get for the whole process. They present in their groups. UTAs will check for correctness. That's important too. And there's some points associated with that too. So then over the course of 10 weeks, what that means is we also have more opportunities for each individual student to speak. They're speaking 2 to 3 times over the semester as opposed to just once. They get more instantaneous feedback, and also students report feeling more confident speaking in a smaller group as opposed to presenting it and just having it like recorded. It's very hard to record things just when no one is giving you any feedback to. So they really appreciate that better. So I did just want to talk about that in terms of this is moving from that project, what we discussed in the workshop, moving it to a more sustainable format, which is what I now use every semester when I teach this course. And I think that's about my time. I'll just put up last slide here for open education resources. So the university does offer these different things. It doesn't have to be OER, but for me, because I'm developing these materials, which I then I think are useful beyond my class, and I want to put them out there and publish them, I got the funding to do that. But of course, there are other opportunities. So as you're developing projects, if you're thinking they may, this is where you get that seed in terms of a project thing you want to do. You think you want it to be something that's going to be beyond that semester. Think about this in terms of other resources that you can apply to get funding and do those projects, make them more sustainable.
Thank you, Linda. I just want to underscore the way in which we can imagine with Linda's presentation, bringing student oral communication into a huge, you said large, I'd say huge lecture course with considerable constraints, right? And I also think that, this is a really nice example of how teaching is a collaborative endeavor, not just between the instructors and the students, but between and among the students themselves. So thank you, Linda, for illuminating those things for us today. Next, we have our third presenter, Patrick Shirey. And Patrick teaches and conducts research in the Environmental Studies program in the Department of Geology and Environmental Science. Patrick's courses include environmental justice, current issues in sustainability, and environmental law and policy. And he's going to be co-teaching a new course in the fall on environmental filmmaking. And he'll be doing that in collaboration with another faculty member, Sarah Moore, in film and media studies. And this is a partnership that started from conversations Patrick and Sarah had in the SID workshop. So lots of potential in speaking in the disciplines. And Patrick's going to tell us about his environmental law and policy course, which he redesigned with the help of both the speaking in the discipline seminar and the writing in the discipline seminar. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, I not only got the benefit of improving the environmental law and policy course and used some of the tools in my other courses, but Sarah Moore and I overlapping in the speaking and the disciplines led to collaborative research and work at the Churchill Valley Greenway, just east of Pittsburgh, and then also developing that environmental filmmaking class and getting support from the Dietrich Innovation Initiative in addition to the co-teaching opportunity too. So it's one of the benefits of the speaking in the disciplines and writing in the disciplines workshops is getting to interact with colleagues from other departments, as we were saying earlier. Like you get to learn from people outside of your core discipline and learn how some of their tools in teaching can be applied to your situation. So I want to talk about this course and how I re-envisioned it in taking it over when I started in this role at the University of Pittsburgh. Um, One of the questions I had is in taking over for teaching environmental law policy is thinking about how we can train the next generation of environmental professionals to communicate risk to policymakers. And both in written form and oral form, this is important. We need it now more than ever. Just this week, cuts were announced to U.S. Forest Service scientists, and that's going to have repercussions for the 193 million acres of forests that are managed in the United States. Being able to communicate the importance of supporting science, importance of maintaining systems that benefit society is going to be critical for some of our majors when they get out into the workforce. So one of the things that I ask people to do is think about your most memorable undergraduate course and what are the elements of that most memorable undergraduate course that you would keep in designing a course. And for me, it was a course in school forest resources in my degree in wildlife and fisheries science at Penn State University that was taught by Karen Glotfelty and Jim Finley. And Karen was the Goddard Chair. The Goddard Chair rotated in every 3 to 6 years. And so Karen had expertise outside of academia. Karen later became director of the Allegheny County Parks after the role as the Goddard Chair. And Jim Finley was a forester that taught forestry in the School of Forest Resources. And so this course was designed for the students to work together to create something new. And in the case of my semester, it was creating a management plan for a private hunting and fishing club in the Poconos. And we worked as a team to create. And it was such a memorable course. I've held on to this management plan for 26 years now. I've had it. Just as a reminder of how important that was for me as a student, and to have that memorable experience pass on to students. And looking back and writing a summary of this and thinking about publishing, I found a publication that Karen and Jim wrote with Paula Ferreri at Penn State about student team projects and natural resource education. Are we achieving educational objectives? And they talk about some of the things that get incorporated into these disciplines workshops, the speaking in the disciplines and writing in the disciplines workshops, such as peer assessment and evaluation, and lessons they learned that they in follow-up reiterations, just like we heard from Linda, how they made those adjustments and changed in some of these courses. And so one of the challenges is making sure we adequately are training our students to communicate science to policymakers because of the difficult nature of communicating risk. That one of the things is making sure we protect young scientists with proper training. And Nancy Barron and others in training through the Communication Partnership for Science in the Sea have highlighted this. And so this book and others, and we have access to these in Pitt Library, both Nancy Barron highlights the message box that I'm going to mention next, and then Josh Schimmel's book, Writing Science, also highlights some of these tools for communication of science to policymakers. And these are not just tools for writing science, but communicating science orally that they highlight is necessary. And this grew out of Jane Lubchenco and her colleagues that called for creating this new social contract for science. She published this in Science in 1998, and she and a couple other colleagues developed the Communication Partnership for Science in the Sea because they felt that marine biologists, fisheries professionals, people that were working in oceanography were recognizing some of the problems that had both local to global implications, and the policymakers and the public just didn't have a full understanding of what the challenges and risks were. And so they developed this training series, and the message box is used as part of this training for helping scientists learn how to communicate their knowledge to the public and to policymakers. And so as part of the exercises in this course, early in the semester, I introduced the message box to students in environmental law and policy. And we walked through an example. I use Fred Rogers' testimony before Senate in 1968, asking for funding for public television. And we go through how effective Fred Rogers was in just 7 minutes of getting a message across that led to the first federal funding for public television in the country. And the message box goes through, asks people to think about, okay, who is the audience? What is the issue involved here? What are the problems involved in this issue? What are the benefits of resolving this problem? What are the solutions that are out there for resolving this problem? And then, so what? Why should we care about this problem? Why should society care about this problem? Why should policymaker care about this problem? So I worked students through this, and because these skills were valuable for me for communicating science. You learn to make mistakes in a safe environment, and learning to speaking to learn, as Linda just pointed out, as a theme of the Speaking in the Disciplines workshop. We allow students to make these mistakes in a safe environment and then go and apply those skills in a less safe environment where you may have someone hostile to your idea. And students learning how to do this in the classroom and communicating with one another is one way we can do that. And so these type of opportunities and using the message box helped me prepare for future opportunities, such that when I was on outreach for some of my research on the Namakagon River, one of the attendees that was attending this ranger-led paddle or was discussing some of the science invited me for an interview live on radio the next morning. Well, I got out the message box, I filled it out, I drew it out. I didn't have one with me, and I was much more comfortable in a 30-minute live segment than if I had not prepared that way. And so I communicate. So how can I help students prepare like I was prepared in these workshops? The speaking in the disciplines, the writing in the disciplines, and another training and to communicate science to policymakers. And the advantage of taking over this course and starting fresh was I thought, what goal would I want to achieve, like the private management plan for the Hunting and Fishing Club? My idea was that we could have students aim to publish in a journal that targets early career scientists, and the Journal of Science Policy and Governance allows this. They allow students and early career scientists to publish their policy ideas, policy recommendations. And so in revamping the course, changed it from one where students memorized federal environmental laws, had a midterm exam and a memo and a final exam, and in-class participation, to these short assignments to build confidence and competence, where students learn where to find laws and policies and find science to support laws and policies, and then having students aim to create in the end. I have create something that is useful. And so 8 student groups since 2023 have ended up publishing, and with another one having recently been accepted. And just as an example of building that confidence, Emily Greenland and Ryan Lewis just conversed with their representatives in the Pennsylvania legislature about the dangers of PFAS, because the Pennsylvania legislature is currently considering a bill. And so they engaged with their representatives and built on that confidence of oral communication that they learned in the classroom to convey this to others. One advantage is 27% of the students enrolled have ended up publishing over the last few years. And one of the things that came out of this workshop that I think is critically important is that requiring of peer assessment, like Linda was just saying about peer assessment and in the presentations. This is something I require for both the outline, the draft, the final draft, and the podcast or oral presentation that they do at the end of the semester. And this semester, because the class is on Fridays, they're going to be participating in the sustainability symposium with other sustainability courses. And so this gives the students an opportunity to share orally their work throughout the semester. And these sustainability showcases and symposiums were started years ago by Ward Allebach and have continued with MCSI and other faculty support. And they've really grown, and it gives the students to build that confidence, because that experience, those alumni relations, start in the classroom. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm just loving what I'm hearing from everybody today. This idea that the student speaking and listening, it can impact students' lives in the classroom, what they're able to achieve in classroom, but it can also impact their lives outside the classroom, what they're able to achieve in their civic communities, what they're able to achieve in a policy-making sphere, and of course, in a larger disciplinary context as well. So thank you, Patrick, for really uh, bringing that to our attention with this work. I also just want to give a shout out to the listening component, because we've heard from all 3 presenters the importance of listening. The title of the faculty seminar is Speaking in the Discipline, but as I tell everyone on the first day of that seminar, it doesn't make any sense to speak if no one's going to listen. So we're really, I think, getting a rich sense this morning of how speaking and listening work together, and how students can learn how to do that better, and also learn important material from their courses. So at this point, we're going to open the floor to questions. And again, you can put them in the chat, or you can speak them out loud. And well, let me see, maybe change my view here. Yeah, you can use the hand up icon to signal when you would like to ask a question. I see Marie. Yes, please.
Hi everyone. I'm intrigued to ask Linda regarding the Lightboard recording. That final picture, is that literally you send the students off, they record? Is it a they basically do the lesson and then they upload it, or how does it actually,
Oh,
is it something they
yes.
do on their own?
So because I only had a total of 14 students going over to do this, I went over with them. It is a university facility, which I believe you would have to have a faculty member there to do that. But I was also guiding this process in terms of, well, I would go over with each student, make sure that they knew what they were going to do ahead of time. And then I would just leave them in the room. It's a small room. It's where they do the podcasting too. It's like a soundproof room. And I would just leave the room. I'd be outside the room while they were working on this. But I would let them run it through 3 or 4 times. And then the best recording is the one that I would take and make my worksheets with. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, excellent. So they did that independently and then they uploaded it to you somehow.
So I was there for the recording. And so while they're doing the recording, it's recorded on the university system. I would then download that and I would do the editing and put it up. So the Zoom recordings that they did initially, they would do all themselves and just send me the links. And then I would put that up for, I use Top Hat. Everyone's familiar with that, but it's a platform that's available for our students for free. Through the university. They don't pay for that out of pocket. And so you could set that up to do, the way I did it was I would get all the links from the students. And then I would set it up to be randomly assigned through Top Hat to students to review. That's just the recordings on Zoom. For the ones done on the Lightboard, I would get the recordings, I would do the editing, and I upload that for students to view in future semesters.
An excellent idea, thanks.
There's a question here in the chat for Jay. How much class time do you dedicate to helping students build their soft skills, conducting interviews, interpersonal communication, etc.? The first 2 or 3 weeks? Could you kindly expand a bit more? Excellent question. Thank you for that.
I think the answer to that, no matter how much I do, it's never enough. We could always have more opportunities to practice these kinds of skills. And I keep it fairly flexible. Like with every semester, I have the things that I know I must do, and then I have things that, in terms of like lecture materials and like new content, and then I have things that I always have sort of in my back pocket. Like if there's time, we'll cover this. If we need more time to work on something, like, okay, let's practice an interview. Let's talk about how the projects are going, the challenges of the given week. We will take more time. Just on Wednesday, I had a lecture prepared, ready to go, but the students had their drafts coming up and they had some issues or some questions or some details they had to hash out. So we took that class time to talk about it. And we talked as a large group, we did some small group workshopping, and I was flexible in that capacity. So I designed my syllabus to try and maximize the amount of time we have available to that without shortcutting the actual instruction of here's what this method is all about and how you do it and those types of things. So it's definitely a delicate balance, and I try and get as much as possible in there.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Seth. It's a really important one in some ways, fundamental in the sense that, you know, what we're talking about here is how to design a course, right? And how to design a course in a way that makes it possible to teach what we might call, the content of our courses, the vocabulary in biological sciences, for example, the vocabulary in ethnomusicology, and so on. But we also want to make space for students to develop these speaking and listening skills, and that takes time because they have to practice. So I'm curious if any of the panelists can say a bit about how they approach that challenge in the early part of redesigning the course. How did they approach the challenge of making time for students to speak and listen, develop confidence in that ability, and also learn the content, I'll call it, or other maybe technical skills that would be relevant to succeeding in the course?
I can go first if you want.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, so what I would try to do is develop as many specific rubrics as possible. I recorded some of the instructions so the students could see this, and then it could be reused for each of the students throughout the semester. But the other thing I want to do is that for students who were nervous about making their first Zoom recordings, is to make sure that they had an opportunity to practice. And so they were invited to come to office hours, usually UTA office hours, because they'd be a bit nervous to maybe present to me. They'd be more comfortable presenting to undergraduate teaching assistants. So they had that opportunity to kind of pre-practice before they made their recording.
And I think the practice is really important. We talk a lot about scaffolding. I know that happens in the writing in the discipline seminar, but certainly in the speaking version as well, right? How to basically build from foundations up so that students aren't sort of, forced, boom, put in the spotlight, give a presentation, and how do I do that? I don't even know who I'm talking to because I haven't had a chance to, talk with them one-on-one in class or anything like that in some kind of, peer informal assignment. So I think this is a really important question. So thanks, Linda, for sharing that thought. Anybody else? Patrick, did you have any thoughts on how you squeeze in all this stuff?
I think the importance of giving group time where the students can communicate one-on-one in practice. Like for me, they have to navigate choosing what topic early in the semester so that they don't fall behind. And that includes convincing other students that your idea is one to pursue. It includes listening and providing input to one another, and navigating those group dynamics, I think, is is challenging, but it's that informal. One of the things you had stressed in the workshops, Lynn, it's that informal oral communication that builds that confidence, and it's that repetition is important. So I carve time out every week for the students to have that group time, when I'm not delivering the lecture content.
Thanks, Patrick. Yes, please, Maureen.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. I really enjoyed them. I'm Maureen and I'm in the English department. Um, and I was wondering how any of the panelists, address considerations of AI use in any aspect, script preparation, or that's probably the biggest one, I suppose, I would imagine. How do you address it? Have you run into any issues with it? Or you do things to prevent issues? Yeah.
A couple of things to say about that. The nature of my class is such that use of AI very quickly reveals itself to the students to not be very helpful when you have to actually go talk to somebody and have an interactive conversation. There's a very limited window for which that can be useful. So I have had some students use it for some of the written components of the class, putting together the bibliographies or trying to summarize a text and things like that. And I'm experimenting or exploring possibilities of more actively using AI for such things in a more critical way to kind of, okay, see what the AI says and then see what you think after reading the text and making that a more formal assignment. I don't think I have room in this class for that, but I think that's a really useful approach. But I think in my experience, students have found themselves pretty quickly that in this context, the AI has very concrete limitations and move away from it pretty quickly. So that's encouraging to me, I guess.
Thanks, Jay. And Maureen, I'll just say that I think you're asking a question that I would think every single educator is grappling with now. And what it means to grapple with that question seems to change almost by the hour because the technology keeps developing. So it's a really, really tough question, but an important one to ask. From the speaking in the disciplines context, one can think about sort of the impromptu components that are involved in speaking and listening. And Jay sort of gestured towards that, as did Patrick. When students are forced to interact with each other live, right? They have to rely on their resources, wherever those resources come from. So the performance element, I think, is really important, and that's why building these sort of skills, these speaking and listening skills, over the course of a semester, is a good idea. Rika, hi, good to see you again.
Hi, Lynn. It's nice to see you too. And Patrick, it's nice to see you as well. And Jay. Thank you all. That was really interesting to hear about your various projects. I kind of have a question that I'd be interested in hearing from everyone, I guess. But I wondered if you found this kind of um, revision of and sort of recentering of speaking in the classroom, whether you found that it influenced other aspects of your classroom setting. Like, did you find that students were overall more willing to speak up in class generally, or was it kind of more focused on this, I guess, more professional manifestations of speaking?
Patrick, please.
Yes, absolutely. I've noticed that, Rika, think it builds confidence. Like the message box in particular, I found when students use it, it builds their confidence, and I've noticed increased student participation. So I've incorporated in some of my other classes too, and then they feel comfortable, because you give them the confidence beforehand, and then also I may ask them to have a conversation with one another before having a conversation before the larger group in the class. And I think that that's often been helpful. That think, pair, share, breakout, especially students that might be a little apprehensive and nervous, has helped. Yeah.
Yes, I've had a very similar experience where even some of the students who at the beginning of the semester, I think, oh, that's probably a very shy student. I won't push them too hard. Sometimes they become some of the most active participants in the classroom after a few weeks, which is really exciting. It's not a universal trend, though. There are definitely some students who are just like not going to speak, and unless they're called upon. And I try to let students exist in their comfort zone while being inviting and trying to get them to speak. But I definitely think the majority of my students are unafraid to speak up and contribute and even make mistakes, which is really great.
Thanks for that question, Rika. And I'll throw out, this isn't in the sort of speaking in the disciplines context, but in some ways, what I've learned teaching that seminar, facilitating that seminar from colleagues, as was pointed out, we learn a lot from each other, has influenced how I teach public speaking, right? And the whole point of the course is to speak. And I've incorporated more listening, and we do a lot more workshops than I used to do. In fact, I used to poo-poo workshops. I'm like, that's going to take time away from all this important content that I have to teach. We need to understand what public life is all about before we can even talk about how to put together an effective and appropriate public speech. So there's workshops before every formal speech assignment, and there's at least two workshops before each of those assignments. And the students, they work in pairs. And one of the most delightful experiences that I had last semester teaching that course, so they met on the 14th floor of the cathedral in our department's what we call the seminar room. And there's a lobby, right? So you exit the elevators, and there's a lobby with some modern furniture, coffee tables, chairs, couches. And when I would exit the elevator, heading towards my office, before I head to the classroom, I would hear this huge din, right, of voices, people just talking about whatever it is they were talking about. And that was the only time that I would ever hear people talking in a lively conversation or lively conversations with each other without being asked to do that in that space. So I really think that that encouraging students to speak and listen in the classroom makes a difference to their capacity and willingness to do it in the classroom, but also their desire to do it outside the classroom. Please, Linda.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something related to both Rika and Maureen's question. So why is it students use Gen AI to do these, activities? It has to come, my own personal belief is it comes from a lack of confidence. The more opportunities you provide your students to speak, the more confidence they build, the less they rely on those type of tools. And so it has a lot to do with setting that culture early in the semester. And I'm lucky in a way when I teach Bio 1 because this is often the very first class they have students have on campus, right? And you'll see that the first week, everyone is there 10 minutes early with their pencils ready to go. They're so excited. So you can set that culture very early by inviting that kind of conversation. So it's certainly easier to do more formal presentations in a recitation where there's smaller groups. But just even as Patrick said, think, pair, share within the classroom, just giving people a few moments to kind of gather their thoughts, try it out with a neighbor, and then asking them to participate in the larger classroom. I think once you build that culture, students are certainly more willing to engage with that as they build their confidence.
Yeah, I think culture shift is really one of the important points coming out of the conversation, right? We have to create a culture in which speaking and listening are valued, and a culture in which we understand that it's not easy to, sort of be that vulnerable, especially with strangers. So, helping students appreciate what speaking and listening can bring to their experiences, their educational experiences, and more. That's definitely important. And then giving them incremental opportunities to do that oral communication really plays a key role. I want to give a shout out before I forget to the Oral Communication Lab, which is housed in the Department of Communication. It's the place where undergraduate students, who have taken the public speaking course and done well in it, they basically act as coaches, and any undergraduate can take any oral communication assignment to the lab. They set up a 30-minute appointment and have a conversation with the peer coach about whatever questions they have relevant to the assignment. They can even rehearse a conversation. If they're doing mock interviews, that's an opportunity for them to get some feedback on those interviews and so on. So it's a great space for our undergraduates, and we also. I should say the lab is for staff and faculty as well. So you yourself could go and experience its benefits before asking your students to go there. And if you were to go to the lab as a student or as a staff member or faculty, you would work not with the undergraduate students, although I'm sure they would have useful things to say. You would work with the director of the oral communication lab, who is a teaching professor in the communication department. So a useful resource. It is 11:59. If there's a teeny tiny question that could be answered in 30 seconds, let's go for it. Otherwise, we might want to say thanks very much to our panelists, Linda O'Reilly, Jay Arms, and Patrick Shirey. Thanks, Adriana, for making this possible. Thanks, Russ, for the tech behind the scenes. And thanks to all the participants who came out, all the attendees, Marie, Rika, Maureen. Appreciate your questions. This event has been all the richer as a result of them.
Thank you. And thank you, Lynn, for all of your devotion and for inspiring us to do better with this. And just wanted to say in general, coming out of COVID, how we've been seeing students reach out and ask for these skills. I think more than ever in the time of undergraduate teaching, these skills are crucial, and the guidance that this is presenting is helpful. So anyone watching this, please reach out to Lynn Clark with more information. And thank you all very much.